At last, Mark finally lives up to his name and gets a win, and walked out of this episode perfectly fine, and it truly shows that he is... This episode is jam-packed with powerful heroes and an insane ending that you need to watch the episode to see, so let's talk about it. Now there will be spoilers ahead, so come back after you have watched it.
Hey! I'm not your training dummy!
This episode shows us the long-awaited arrival of Powerplex, voiced by Jesse from Breaking Bad. Now we see the effect that the fight between Invincible and Omni-Man had on the rest of the world, and the lives lost during the chaos. One of the unfortunate casualties from this was Scott Duvall's sister and niece, and it's a lot like the moment in Batman vs Superman where Bruce sees the destruction caused by the fight between Superman and Zod. Scott then vows to make Invincible pay for the destruction even though it's Omni-Man's fault, so he joins the GDA, and then he sees all the other times innocent people were hurt due to Mark fighting people. And so he becomes Powerplex, a superpowered individual who can absorb and redistribute energy, and he wants revenge, so he gets these discs that can absorb energy beyond what he's capable of, and then he uses it to practically become it. And then he gets beat up by his wife, and we see that he gets stronger the more he gets hit. Meanwhile, Mark is busy training Oliver, and they fight the elephant. And Oliver doesn't want to listen to Mark, but he does listen to Eve. Oliver is then annoyed by the fact that he even has to train since he's already fought villains, even though he did brutally rip them apart. He also talks about how Nolan is a good guy, and the world needs to see him for who he is. And Oliver can now remember everything that's ever happened in his life because he's half Thraxan. Then we see Mark, Eve and Oliver have dinner with Paul and Debbie, and Paul is moving really sus. Then we see Mark meet Amber whilst bowling with William right at the point when Powerplex first attacks. And he challenges Invincible to fight, but instead he served up Sonic.
Konnichiwa!
Wait, no, Shapeshifter. Shapeshifter then gets his butt kicked by Powerplex and Powerplex flies away. The next day is a memorial service for the victims of the Chicago incidents, and the Graysons attend. Mark feels super guilty about all of this death and destruction caused by this, but Powerplex decides to show up since Invincible will almost definitely be... Nah, he's not there. It's Atom Eve instead. She then manages to capture him and hands him to the Guardians, but he escapes and pretends to kidnap his wife and child in order to lure Invincible out, and this time it actually works. Mark also learns from Donald about why Powerplex is coming after him. The two then fight, and this leads to Scott's wife and son dying due to an explosion caused by him, and he's slowly becoming the very thing he swore to destroy, but more on that later. Rudy then finds a way to stop Monster Girl from getting younger every time she transforms using this belt, and then we learn that Ray is planning on leaving the superhero life and hopes to live a normal, ordinary life, which we have been seeing teasers of throughout the season so far, and we learn about Rex's past and how he was put up for adoption and then experimented on by the GDA. Then the episode ends with Mark going to see Powerplex in prison, who vows to break out and kill Mark, whilst Mark is also trying to sympathise with him. He then feels bad, and as per always, Eve comes to comfort him, but they're being spied on by Angstrom Levy, and this sets up that the next episode we will witness the Invincible War with all of the variants of Mark. This episode was wild, mainly because of the reveal at the end, but also because Powerplex is such an interesting character, whose original motives are very similar to Zemo in Civil War, because Zemo in that movie was trying to tear the Avengers apart after his family had died in Sokovia, and in this Powerplex is getting revenge for his sister's death. But where Zemo doesn't have powers to physically get revenge himself, Powerplex does, and it's always so emotional seeing the other side of superhero battles, because in most cases we see it from the perspective of the heroes or the villains. So when they fight, it seems like a well-deserved, true battle of good versus evil, but every now and then we do see the aftermath and the effect it has on ordinary civilians. And it does sort of ground you and make you realize the impact these fights have on normal humans. And it seems as though this season wants us to consider so many interesting ideas that the superhero genre otherwise doesn't talk about. But Powerplex also does show us what happens when someone gets too obsessed with getting revenge and ends up losing all the things that they already have. Like, had Mark run off at the end of season 1 to chase Omni-Man, he might have lost Debbie or Eve, or Oliver wouldn't even exist. But the fact that Mark chose to move on and live with what's left is why he hasn't lost everything yet. But Scott spends a good year or two obsessing over Invincible and trying to get revenge, that it ultimately leads to him losing the remaining family that he does have. And it's so well written. And the writing in this episode is so well done, because it doesn't feel like the usual triumphant victory that we feel for Mark, but instead it still felt like a loss, and that's the main emotion that this show is trying to put forward. Also, seeing the two different love stories blossom was kind of cool, with Robot and Monster Girl and Rex and Ray, even though Robot and Monster Girl has been going on for way too long, just get together already. But Ray's storyline of wanting to leave the superhero life behind shows that it's not all sunshine and rainbows being a hero, and it's the main lesson we see from Spider-Man, and I have a bad feeling that everything will go right in Ray's life and then she will die. and make us all cry. But the ending of the episode has me so hyped for the next 2 episodes, as we will see Mark face off against versions of himself. And one thing I did notice as well is Angstrom Levy also has a similar arc to Powerplex, because originally he wanted to kill Mark because in most other universes Mark is evil with Nolan, but now he's teaming up with the very people he once hated to kill the one not evil variant of Mark, so they both became the very thing they swore to destroy. But overall this episode was emotional and thought provoking, so it gets an 8 out of 10. Subscribe and comment below your thoughts.